Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Chamber Connects program. We're recording this morning's program just as a reminder, and we'll post it for viewing a little bit later on today on the Chamber's YouTube channel, as well as our Facebook page. In a few minutes, we'll connect with Assemblyman Joe Angelino. If you have some questions for the Assemblyman, please be sure to post them in the chat box area on your Zoom page. Lillian is going through those. She's monitoring the chat box, and we will be she'll be relaying them to me, and I'll be asking them of the Assemblyman. Couple things that I want to tell you about before I introduce the Assemblyman to you. I'm excited to tell you that the Chamber was recently awarded a grant from the Rural Health Network to develop some ideas for a micro transit system, like an on-demand system for Delaware County. What we proposed is a significant shift from past efforts in that we're going to focus our attention on the transportation needs of our employers and our employees. We expect broad participation from business owners, from support agencies, from government and other interested stakeholders. So please, stay tuned as to how you can be involved in that process. I want to remind everyone that New York State is offering grants. I'm not often able to say this, but offering grants to for-profit businesses that were affected by the pandemic and those resulting government-mandated shutdowns. The amounts start at $5,000, could be as much as $50,000. To be eligible, you must employ less than 100 people, have experienced a 25% decline in gross revenue in 2020 versus vis-a-vis 2019, have gross receipts between $25,000 and $500,000, and there's some other requirements as well. The portal for the applications opened just last week, and the link to the application is on our website as well as on the Chamber's Facebook page. It's graduation time here in Delaware County, and our local schools, and I see we have Mike McDonald from Walton Central School on the call this morning. Our local schools are going to be celebrating the achievements of their graduates, and of course we all join their enthusiastic expectations for the future of our young adults. Often, though, this desire that a lot of our graduates have to remain in the area is often diminished by this notion that opportunities are elsewhere and that careers can't be found locally. And you've heard me say this before, the Chamber believes, and I know all of you agree with this idea, that the future in Delaware County is very bright, that our employers are creating leading edge products, competing in global marketplaces. Restaurants, lodging, galleries, museums, theaters continue a centuries-old tradition of welcoming visitors and residents alike to their venues. Farmers and agricultural producers continue to diversify and develop new markets for those products. And certainly we don't want to leave out our retail and service business owners who add to the fabric of our communities and keep our communities really vital places. The best news, and anyone who has driven around Delaware County or anywhere around central New York for that matter, knows that a lot of these employers are seeking to add people to their staffs. Yet there are some who seem to enjoy telling everyone that there are just no jobs here. And they wring their hands saying that youth are our greatest export. We all know that that's a myth, that's a lie, it's false, and that has to stop right now. There are really excellent positions in professional areas, technical entry-level service, many different areas available right now, and wages that can support families. And more importantly, these positions can lead to productive and satisfying careers. So many of us will be attending graduation ceremonies over the next few weeks, and we need to celebrate the accomplishment that our children have have made. They deserve our accolades, and they deserve our respect, especially for their perseverance over these last 15 months. But be sure when you speak with them, tell them that Delaware County really is a part of their future. And please don't discourage them from their desire to remain in the community. It's messages like those that we continue to deliver here at the Chamber. And that also where you're one source for businesses, for information, ideas, inspiration, and most of all, assistance and the facts as to what's happening right now in the world. And if you're not already a member, I encourage you to become a member. And that membership really is an investment in your business that you're going to use every single day. DelawareCounty.org, you know the website, and that's where you can go to get information about all those things that I mentioned. So now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Assemblyman Joe Angelino. Assemblyman Angelino, Joe, is a friend. Joe represents the 122nd district in the New York State Assembly that includes in Delaware County the towns of Colchester, Deposit, Franklin, Hancock, Masonville, Sydney, Tompkins, and Walton. How'd I do, Joe? Joe is a familiar face to many of us in Delaware County and has always been a good friend to our small business community. Joe was elected to the Assembly just in this past November of 2020 and has just completed his first legislative session. Let me tell you a little bit about his public service record, however. It includes a career with the Norwich City Police, during which he served as police chief for 20 years, as well as briefly assuming the role of fire chief that he held concurrently. Joe joined the Marines back in 1985. He's a 3-time combat veteran over 2 wars. Joe served as a tank commander in Desert Storm and an infantry first sergeant during the Iraq invasion in 2003 and again in 2005, for which he received 2 Purple Heart medals. Joe retired from the Marine Reserves as a sergeant major, the highest enlisted rank, in 2008. He currently serves on the Assembly committees for banking, corporations, authorities, and commissions, oversight, analysis, and investigations, people with disabilities, and finally, tourism, parks, arts, and sports development. My goodness, that keeps someone very busy. Joe, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Ray. It's nice to see everyone. First off, I saw the meeting is being recorded, so I just want to get this out there. I am not an attorney. I will give you my insight and my opinions, but please refer to your corporation counsel or your legal staff before you go running off and say, well, my assemblyman said, fill in the blank. Those committees that I was on that you mentioned, Ray, I was most comfortable being on the investigations committee because that's what I did for a major part of my life. My whole adult life, I was a police officer. And the past year, with everything that has happened and a lot of the stuff that we read about in the papers, I thought my investigations committee would be very busy. However, we've never met. So when you say I'm very busy, corporation, sports development, people with disabilities, all of those committees are very active. But the investigations and oversight never met over the past year. And I don't know exactly why that is because I'm brand new. I'm the ranking member on that committee. And I asked the chairman, how is that? And he said, because they created all these different commissions and the attorney general and other people are taking charge of that. And when it came to the impeachment, I was a little apprehensive that that would be handed to us, but it did not. It went to the Judiciary Committee. because those are mostly attorneys. So anyway, a little bit about that. I don't know what you want to hear or what you want to, if you want to ask me anything, Ray, or.
I do. I have several questions that folks have
Perfect.
put together. So let's get right into some of those. I'm sorry. Let's get my video going again. I'm sorry. You just completed your first legislative session, and I'm a little stunned about what you just told us about the investigations committee. But part of that first legislative session included the budget process, and that was your first that you really experienced as a member of the assembly. Besides what you told us about the investigation committee, are there some other observations that you have about how things are? What are those surprises that you found? What are some of your observations that you saw during those first 6 months as our assembly representative?
Well, it was certainly an eye opener. I had been involved with Assemblyman Crouch's office for a number of years, but only on the periphery. I wasn't an employee. I was basically a friend and a volunteer for Cliff, and so I had an inkling of what happened. The budget process went just about as you would expect. We've all heard it used to be called the 3 men in a room, and now it's 3 people in a room because the Senate president is a female from Westchester, and of course Mr. Hasty is the Speaker of the Assembly from the Bronx, and the governor. But this year the governor was first off, he knew going in before anything happened that the Assembly and the Senate both have supermajorities and they can override any veto. So he went in a position of weakness, and that's my opinion. And also all of the other troubles that surrounded him at about that time didn't help his position of negotiations. So it was basically whatever the legislature wanted, they put in. And so now we have a budget that is almost 10% more than the budget was 2 years ago. And while we're trying to live under a 2% tax cap, the budget is approximately $212 billion. And that is the biggest budget we've ever had. And in my opinion, it's not going to be sustainable because that was propped up by some federal money from the COVID and CARES money. Yeah. So when it comes time to have a budget again next year, we're either going to have to make painful cuts to service because I don't know how they're going to sustain this. And the other alternative is painful tax increases, which they are very prone to do. So that's my first impression of the budget process. I want to add to that, and some of you may have heard me say this before. New York State is 4th in population. California is 1st, then Texas, then Florida, and New York. New York's $212 billion budget is larger than Texas and Florida combined. And we're 4th in population, but we've doubled the 2 above us. So that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people.
Joe, you mentioned you talked about the budget process, and you have both houses with supermajorities, which certainly constrains your position as a member in the minority. There are a lot of issues, even still, there were a lot of issues that were left unresolved at the end of that session. Which of those issues do you think will reappear during the next session?
I'll answer your question, Ray, but I want to make a comment. Even though we're in the minority party, we bring up really good points. And a lot of times what we say on the floor during debate later on becomes an amendment to their bills, because there's been times when we've brought stuff up because we only get they work on these bills. We don't see them until they hit our desk. And then it could be 3 days later but a lot of times it goes through our committee process. And that's when we bring up stuff. And I've seen them on the floor when we're debating, they do the, we never thought of that moment. And that's why when you see some of these bills are always a number, like 1, 2, 3, 4. But sometimes they have a letter after them, A, B, C. I've seen them go as high as D. Those are amendments, meaning it's been amended. And a lot of times that's because of what we brought up. And in March, just before the budget process began, that's when there was a movement to impeach the governor for some of the things he's been accused of. And the Republican Party had what we call hostile amendments to attach to bills. And a hostile amendment can be brought up on the floor at the time of debate. And there were enough majority members that agreed with us that we had the numbers to impeach the governor. So what happened was, because of the pressure that the Republican Party was putting on, the majority party canceled session. They just stopped because they didn't want to do any voting. And I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but 2.5 days later, we came back into session and it was never heard of again. So I don't know what happened to the votes to impeach, but we knew there were 43 Republican votes, and there must have been enough on the other side so that they froze and just stopped session. So there were no votes taken for 2.5 days. Okay, so say again your question. Things left undone.
What issues might be coming up that weren't resolved during this past session?
Well, there was the big one that I was doing a lot of research on was the single payer healthcare. And that was brought up last year, and we knew this year it was going to be a big push for that, and there was. But I think the details of that got out to the public, and they realized that was not just a paradigm shift, but just a huge earthquake change in the way New York does business. And I think they got a lot of pushback, and that never came up. We never heard of it. So I think a lot of people were concerned, and those concerns got voiced. Mainly, it was, I was a union president for the local PBA, which is a police union. And I remember years ago negotiating healthcare and trying to keep the cost of the employees in line and trying to keep the benefits there. And we gave up pay raises a couple of times for an entire year to keep our health benefits. Well, all of that would have been erased with the stroke of a pen. And, I was just one small police union back then, but I think a lot of the unions who have negotiated hard realized that was going to go away, everything they worked and, negotiated, and that was going to disappear. And I think the unions also put some pressure on that. Because I've seen union carve-outs in legislation before. But if there was going to be a union carve-out for that, it was just too much for them to swallow, and it would have been very hard to sell to the public. So that didn't appear. Now, the one that a law that did pass that still needs work was the marijuana legislation. And I voted no on that, because we were building the airplane while it was flying, and we are still doing that. So when we passed that bill that night, as soon as the governor signed it, marijuana became legal to smoke in public. But the problem was, I voted no because there were no safety valves in there for driving while impaired. There's no way to test for it. We just doubled the way you can legally drive we just legally doubled the way to drive while intoxicated illegally, alcohol and now marijuana, and there was no way to test for it. And there were a lot of people on the majority side that also voted no for that reason. But that still is a work in progress, and municipalities have till December to decide what to do on this. And that law, first off, it legalized marijuana recreation for adult use. It
Mhm.
also said there has to be a cannabis advisory board and a cannabis, one is the advisory board and the other is the regulatory board.
Okay,
And the legislature has to appoint the members of that to set the rules and how this is going to work. We never did that. So now municipalities are under the gun to decide what to do, and they don't even know what the regulations are yet. And so that is a big left undone. That's, I'd have to read off my cheat sheet. Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
well, I was going to ask you if, you're going to be going back into session sometime this fall. Do you see that as something that's going to come up to give our municipalities some guidance
Well,
so they can
our
make an
session,
decision?
our session is done for the year. We're not
Oh, that's
scheduled,
true.
we're not scheduled to go back until January of 22.
Okay,
There's some suspicion that we might get called back in August because the rent moratorium that was set to expire in April was extended while we were in session. It was extended to August 31st. And there's a suspicion that we might get called back in August to extend that again. I hope not, because we're digging people into a rent hole that it's going to be tough to get them out of.
right. If the legislature doesn't return for special session prior to the end of the year, is there some advice? Again, we're not going to,
Okay,
give you a
again,
disclaimer, but
see,
is there something that you can suggest is there some help that you can suggest that municipalities seek
well,
regarding that decision?
regarding, first off, they're depending on the tax money for this. And their estimates are, in the low millions, 115 million in 23, 158 million in 24. So the original bill had county opt-out, meaning each county legislature or board of supervisors could opt their county out. Well, they realized that if they were going to depend on tax revenue, if some of the big counties like Nassau, Monroe, Erie opted out, they would never hit their tax projections. So counties were literally lined out of that law when it hit our desk. But it had village, town, and city opt-outs. So once a municipality opts in, you're in. If you opt out, you can always try to opt back in later. And if you're asking for advice, I would do like some of the bigger cities are doing. They're waiting until they know what the rules and regulations are before they opt in. Because like I said, if you opt in, there's no going back. If you opt out, you can go back later. So if you're in forever. And like right now, there's no rules. Again, and I gotta caution, please, I'm not an attorney. I dealt with laws that all these people wrote for years, and there's still laws on the books that contradict other laws. But I can tell you, we never voted on any advisory commission or any of the regulatory commission. So, and those are all legislative appointments.
Joe, I want to talk about a piece of legislation that started moving through committees and seemed to have gotten stalled. And I want to see what you think, if it's something that's going to be back on the agenda for the next session, whenever that may be. One piece of legislation would set a fee for the amount of carbon produced by an item. And some have pointed out that this carbon tax, as they call it, would increase the price of gasoline by 55 cents a gallon. And by my estimation, a quart of wood by $200. Actually, no, much more than that.
Yeah, it was more.
Yeah, it would be about $500. Funds generated by this tax would be dedicated to public transportation projects like New York City subways, rails, and the like. what's your position on that legislation? And do you think it's going to be on the agenda whenever the legislature returns to session?
My position is I will vote against that. I don't know. This is very similar to the one-payer healthcare. When the devil in the details came out to the public, there was such a backlash about fuel costs, but there was other stuff in that too, like closing off pipelines into New York, and Western New York, Erie, Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, 94 or 96% of those people use natural gas to heat, cook, boil water, and there's just not enough electricity in the grid to do this. So here's my impression. And again, I still consider myself more cop than politician, because this is also new to me. And I sit there and realize I'm representing 130,000 people, and I try to speak your voice. There are people who sit in the chamber with me who are so passionate about this, and their passion overrides our collective. We just like to stay the same. Our status quo is what we would like. There's not a lot of passion in that. Yeah. So their passion is contagious on their side of the aisle. And the assembly is made up of 150 members, and about 100 of them are south of Yonkers. So that's what, and a lot the makeup. When I was sitting in the assembly and somebody would either pop up on the Zoom screen or stand up to speak, everybody was new to me. So on my desk, we have a laptop, and I'd look up that assembly member and read their biography and get a feel for where they're coming from. A lot of them are young. Many of them have a history in community organizing or working for not-for-profits or charity groups, homeless advocacy groups. So they've never really been in business and had to employ jobs, and they've lived off government grants. And a lot of them are 33 and younger.
Sure.
And so, like I said, their passion is contagious down there. And it's not that they don't care about us up here. It's that they are indifferent to our lifestyle. And I can't remember who said it, but it was when he blamed upstate New York for the pollution that New York contributes. And now New York is a minuscule. If we went all electric right now, we would be saving like 0.003% of the world carbon emissions. It's a laudable goal. But like I said, they are very impatient about this. And impatient is not my words. That's a word from a very senior Democrat in the majority who sees this, changing. But he said they're very impatient about this. But they've never really had to hire somebody and worry about a bottom line and answer to shareholders or how to keep the business running. So that's sort of what I'm up against when I read the biographies of these people. Again, it's very laudable. A great example is just last week, we were debating the paint color of storage tanks for fuel. And any storage tank over 1,100 gallons has to be painted white, gray, or beige, and certain tones of those three colors. And it said all storage tanks over 1,100 gallons. And this was a young female member and is very passionate about carbon release. And she felt that when the sun shines on these tanks, that they expand and they heat up, expand, and some gas leaks, which is a teeny tiny amount. But when it said all tanks, there's a gentleman who sits to my right who's a dairy farmer. And he said, so does this include, this says all tanks. Do you realize what it says? And she said, yes, all tanks. And he said, well, what about the ones that are already buried under all the gas stations? Are those included? And she said, yes. So, who's going to dig up a tank to paint it? So I think that'll be one of those amendments, but they're so passionate about this that they don't really think in the real world terms of how this is going to impact, because they don't really have a grasp of our lifestyle up here.
Well, it's nice to know that there's still some room for common sense that does creep into some of the legislation. One of the topics. Well, before I get to that, yesterday or day before, I guess it was, we all got some good news from the governor that the rest of the restrictions, albeit not for nursing homes or health facilities and a few others, that we're returning to some normalcy in New York State, as he likes to call it. But yet the governor still has these executive powers that folks on your side of the aisle are trying to have revoked or set a definite expiration date. Is that going to happen?
Well, in March, there was an expiration date.
Yeah.
But as we sit here right now and we're all talking and some restrictions are lifted, we're still under a state of emergency in New York State, granting him, the governor, executive powers. Those were set to expire. And there was this big hoopla in March that the legislature is reining in the governor's powers. And again, the devil's in the details. When I read it, it actually extended the end date. And so that was actually, it was just the reverse. They weren't reining in any powers. They said that he can't create any new orders unless he notifies the legislature. So what does that mean? So the legislature has a supermajority, and we can stop this. But there are many, there's still people who sat and testified on the assembly floor, and it's recorded, that said, I don't care if he lifted it now, I'm wearing my mask and I'm not leaving my apartment until I feel safe. So it's real to some of these people in their minds that if they step outdoors, they might die.
Yeah.
So, those are the same people who sit in the same chambers as me and make decisions. So we didn't rein in any of the governor's powers. And a couple of weeks ago, we saw what happened on a Friday when he said, we can go maskless now. So that was a Friday. Kids in school, parents were jumping for joy. And over the weekend, I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but Monday that was amended. So right now, the governor said that, we hit 70%, blow off the fireworks, we're out of this, but there's still these restrictions that are creeping up. Schools still have to wear them, healthcare facilities, and now I'm hearing homeless shelters. So there's still, anybody who calls the governor's office with a complaint, they get an exemption. Okay, you still wear it. You can wear it. Okay, yeah, you're right. You better still wear it. So we just need to end this and start getting out of this and get back to what we remember as normal. Some stuff's never going to change. We've learned, 18 months ago, I never heard the word Zoom, and now I'm on it 3 or 4 times a week. So, and this is a technology convenience that allowed us all to get together, and but I wish we could get back to the normalcy. But the situation right now, especially small business, with people getting paid more not to work than to work, it's going to be hard to get back. And right at your intro, when you were talking to your membership, there are businesses right now that need employees, and
Absolutely.
And they can't, jobs that used to pay minimum wage are now they're offering, double that just to get employees in the door. And then you have to pay the employees who were there before more. And I think we're headed for, basically inflation. And if you look closely, check out your packaging on some of your items you buy. Some of the items, I think, what do they call that? Shrinkflation. Some of the, to make up for that, I think their products are starting to be shrunk down in capacity, size, and quantity, but you're still paying the same or more. So check into that, because it has to happen. Otherwise, prices are going to go up, and we're headed for inflation because the government keeps giving away money.
Right. While we're talking about some federal issues, and it's not often that the legislature has a say in federal issues, but one of the topics that you're going to be tackling is redistricting. Redistricting for seats in the state legislature as well as congressional seats. It's already been announced that New York State is going to lose a congressional seat, or very likely to lose the congressional seat. And all this is going to be a very hot topic once the US Census data is released later on this summer. Any feeling, what might we expect from that process?
Well, you can expect that the voters will, in 2014, through a constitutional amendment, was to have a nonpartisan commission draw the lines. Well, pay attention closely, because this November there are at least four constitutional amendments. 3 of them deal with voting and district line drawing. And I think it's payback for what happened a few years ago when the Republicans held the Senate. The Senate used to only be 60 members, and they redistricted to get more members into their party, and it backfired because Democrats got elected, and now this is payback. I'm very junior. I see this going on around me. I try not to worry about it, and because I have no control.
Sure.
If I don't have a district next year, which is, that happened to my predecessor, Mr. Crouch.
I think that happened to Cliff. I think that happened to Cliff twice, didn't it?
Yes,
that he got redistricted out of his house.
Yes, he did. So I don't know if that'll happen. If it does, it does. I put in, right now, I vote my conscience, and I try to be the voice for the people I represent. And I can go to bed at night and sleep well, knowing that I didn't do anything that was going to hurt anyone intentionally because of my vote. So I did vote no a lot, but of course I'm only one man.
Right.
But the redistricting is we not only is it a constitutional amendment, but we've also done some individual bills that are going to tilt the scales. And a lot of that has to do with who can vote and how they vote. Of course, in New York State, you don't need identification to vote. You need it to register to vote. But what they accept are driver's licenses and utility bills. And just as I'm sitting in Binghamton right now, and I represent Broome, Shenango, Delaware, Otsego. I try to represent our values, our district. And that's what everybody in the assembly does. The issue is my district is over 2,000 square miles. There are some districts in New York City that are measured in blocks, and you can walk it in 20 minutes, where it takes me an hour and a half. So those assembly people are representing their district, and their districts are oftentimes made up of illegal or undocumented immigrants, and they are looking out for them because they live in their district, and they're making the rules so that a lot of them can vote. We've also eased up the voting restrictions on felons and people in jail, and they have a different tolerance to crime than we do. That's obvious. They tolerate what is going on down there, You know, if you know the sheriff of Delaware County, if he had what was going on, if he had street crime going on, you know, people would be demanding he do something about this. Well, in the New York City area, it's easy to blame the police, and that's exactly what's going on. So they have a different tolerance, and they're representing their district. And again, remember what I said earlier about their passion for the environment. Well, they have a passion for that, and those who in that area, I don't know, the Bronx or Brooklyn, if you're a seated assembly member down there, if they don't like the way they vote, they will primary them with a socialist, and the socialists have always won because they promised to give it away, the treasury. And not only do they promise to do that, they have the ability and can fulfill that promise. And we saw that with 2.3 billion of our tax dollars going to undocumented, you know, the excluded workers fund. Those were illegal aliens who weren't able to file for federal benefits. So the state said, we'll do it for you. And, you know, so when they can make those promises and there's no way to know if those people are voting or not, you know, that's what I'm up against.
Okay. And for folks who are on the call, just as a reminder, if you have some questions for the Assemblyman, please put them over in the chat area. Joe, you use the word passion. Let's talk about some of our passion here in upstate and here in Delaware County. You're on the Parks Committee in the Assembly. I want to talk about some of our local state parks. Bear Spring Mountains in your district. It's a wonderful, yet I think a very underutilized asset, in part because of the lack of trail and facility maintenance. Trails are overgrown and facilities just have not really been maintained. Aquagas Creek State Park, another park in your right in the middle almost of your district, has been identified as a potential site for a pilot program to allow motorized recreational vehicles on some very specified trails. So we think that both of those state parks could assist as economic development drivers in our region. What might we do to spur some more attention, investment, and creative thinking about the use of our local state parks?
The Bear Mountain, first off, that's the one that has the horseback riding, correct?
Correct. There are a lot of
Yeah.
horseback trails on there, and also a lot of foot, human hiking trails.
Okay, so first off, is it Bear Mountain Spring or is it just Bear Mountain? Because
it's Bear Spring Mountain.
Okay, which oftentimes gets confused with Bear Mountain State Park.
Sure it does.
So here's another point of confusion. It's not a state park. That is run by New York State ENCON, Environmental Conservation.
As opposed to the parks. Yeah.
Which is an Aquaga and Shenango Valley, Bowman Lake, Glimmerglass.
Right.
Those are true New York State Parks Recreation Historic Preservation properties. Okay. Bear Spring Mountain is a DEC primitive use area, and there's several of those, and they get different marketing. And DEC or ENCON is more, they're more geared towards environmental protection, where the state parks are geared more towards recreation. So that's the first thing going against Bear Spring Mountain. It's not really a state park. It's a it's basically state land. And, Shenango County, where I live, has more state land per square mile per capita than any county. So I'm really familiar with state land. And we have some great ENCON attractions in our state land. We have observation towers built up, and there's a trail system. But the underutilization of Bowman Lake State Park is hurtful to me, because I see what happens right over my right shoulder in Shenango Valley State Park. The roads are paved and nice. There's actually pavement painted line markings where Bowman Lake hasn't been repaved in ages, and the blacktop is turning into dirt, crumbled roads.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with Aquaga. This all, the lack of use has its origins in the lack of population. We've lost over 1 million people from upstate New York in the last decade, and that underutilization. So the horseback, or I always thought the horseback area would almost be like, if they could contract that out to somebody to have like a dude ranch type place. And I think people, even if we only got a percentage of 1% of New York City population to come up here for recreation, that would help out a great deal with the horseback riding there and the trail use. But remember, it's not a park, it's state land. It's
Well,
primitive
to
use.
the public, the public perception is immaterial. I understand where it fits within the regulatory scheme
Right.
of things, but we're seeing in parts of the Catskills, particularly in Ulster and Greene County, and to a lesser degree in Sullivan, over utilization of not state parks, but state land. And part of our strategy within the Catskill region, my tourism colleagues, is to how do we then push those folks further west, further into the Catskills, to places like Bear Spring Mountain. But when folks come there, they find hiking trails that are overgrown. They find facilities that are in disrepair. How do we find that parity for? It's an old line that you've heard me say before. How do we find that parity for the Catskills vis-a-vis places even like Binghamton? So how do we find that parity for the rural areas in state funding, in state investment, and state attention for some of these parks? Do we just become the squeaky wheel?
It does. Well, that always helps. Yes. If you have an idea, I can advocate for that. I would be happy to. I got endorsed by the Conservative Party, which I did because of my conservation side of me. Yeah. I tried to conserve nature, and that does include hunting of animals to help the healthy population. That includes maintaining properties. And I was going to ask, does the Finger Lakes Trail go in through that state land?
Okay. Absolutely.
Okay, so I know a lot about the Finger Lakes Trail because I'm a member. There's 72 miles of Finger Lakes Trail that winds its way through my county, and I volunteered to take care of a 3-mile section of it because many hands make light work. So my 3-mile section is well maintained. I go up there with a weed whacker. I take care of things. I'm not allowed to use a chainsaw on state land, but there are people who have gone to the safety class. I report and mark trees that need to come down or trees that are blocking. So the Finger Lakes Trail Conference also takes care of, now I take care of the Finger Lakes Trail, but because I'm right there, I also branch over and take care of, it's called the Copac Loop. It's another section of trail that adds on a few more miles. But so that's part of the Finger Lakes Trail Conference. I don't know how active it is in your area, but it's very active in Shenango County. Where they build bridges, lean-tos, and they take care of the trail maintenance. And I can put you in offline. I can put you in touch with those people. But if you have an idea that we need to market for that state park, let me know. I can write letters and I can advocate on any marketing plan you might have for that. We need to bring in dollars from outside the area and have them spent here.
Absolutely, and that's part of our mission. Joe, we just have a few minutes left. I do have a question from Jason Miller, who's the general manager at Delhi Telephone, and I know this has been a ongoing concern for not only them but all of our telecommunication companies throughout New York State. what about your opinion about the Department of Transportation tax on fiber optic cable? The DOT has imposed a tax on that taxes every mile of fiber optic cable that runs through their right of way. And that has made further expansion of a fiber optic network in Delaware County, but throughout upstate New York. And by extension, it has greatly limited our ability to develop cell service in a lot of areas. Is that something that, how do we get DOT to repeal that tax?
Well,
Let's be very frank about it.
that is the biggest impediment to high-speed broadband build out and telecommunications in New York State, particularly the rural areas. I've been in conversations with the people down at the Hancock Phone Company. You know, they're building out where they can on town and county roads. Even just crossing the state highway is huge for them. It's a huge expense. That came up, you know, this year, broadband in rural areas was brought up by both sides, everybody in the legislature, and this was brought up that we need to repeal DOT's tax on right-of-way. And it just falls on deaf ears. I don't know why that is. It doesn't make sense to me. There's a gentleman, an assemblyman by the name of Phil Palmisano, who is our utilities expert. And you know, we've talked to him about it, and he does not get why they won't repeal this. I don't understand it. But you know, DOT also is the ones who basically ended all of our local small town parades if it's on a state highway. I don't know if you guys have dealt with that or not, but they're arcane and very capricious regulations that really hurt. Again, if this was in New York City, where everything is underground to begin with, you know, no one would notice, but a small rural area. So I'm aware of that. And at the same time that the broadband and utility companies are getting hit with that, the legislature majority really has a passion to go after these people with all kinds of rules and regulations. The $15 fee, I think that's already being, I think there's already a lawsuit for that. You can't do that. That's not sustainable for a business to do that. But the climate is very business unfriendly. They're going after the utility company CEO salaries. There's all kinds of, they must be very thought of as being evil in the downstate area, because every time there's a power outage, they created laws that you have to pay for their refrigeration, their food loss, employment loss. They just go after utilities with a vengeance. And I don't get it, because up in our area, we depend on it. Our lifestyle is different. I have a generator, and I bet you people on this call have generators. When the power goes out, you know, we deal with it. We're prepared for it. But they go after these utilities terribly. And that was an eye opener for me, because, you know, nobody's happy paying their power bill, but you understand, you know, we have trees, they come down, we have blizzards, but they're not as understanding downstate towards the utilities. There is movement. We've been explaining that. It came up, you know, that's a relatively new tax, that right away on DOT property. And it got highlighted weekly when they were talking about broadband build out. And there was also some issues about, they created some sort of law. Again, I try to stay in my lane. I listen and I understand, but I can't explain I can't explain the background. But there was also something about allowing broadband fiber optic to go on utility poles. And because apparently there was some right of way or lease issues with utility poles, and the depreciation and the investment and who made the investment in a utility pole. But they did do something to make that a little bit easier. And maybe Jason could even help me. You know, if Jason wants to call me and explain, I would be happy, because I depend on Phil Palmisano, who's been there many years, and he's the utility and regulations man for my party. The broadband is only highlighted after this last year, especially schools and learning.
Joe, it's 9:30, and I want to honor your commitment to us and not extend past what I told you we would be. And I do thank you for your time this morning. How might people get in contact with you, like Jason, and your staff?
Well, you can go to nyassembly.gov and search for your member. Luckily, my name begins with an A, so I'm right at the very top of the page. I have an office in Binghamton. It's actually Catelville in the town of Shenango, and I have an Albany office. If you dealt with Cliff Crouch in the past, nothing changed except the face. Office is the same. The staff, Lori in Binghamton, Don in Binghamton, and Sarah in Albany, all worked for Cliff, and I wasn't going to change that because Cliff was beloved and very successful, and it didn't make sense to change any of that. And also regarding Jason Miller, when I saw his name pop up on the screen, I was just assuming it was the Jason Miller from Sydney Federal Credit Union. And then when he said there was another one over there, so Jason, you have a doppelganger someplace. So anyway, thank you very much, Ray. Please, my email, angelino.j@nyassembly.gov. angelino.j@nyassembly.gov.
And for everyone who's on the call, I will be forwarding a little bit later on this morning or later on today a link to this program, and in that I will include information how you can get in contact with the Assemblyman. Joe Angelino, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Ray.
And thank you, all of you, for spending part of your morning with us at the Chamber Connects. Next month, we connect with another one of our Assembly representatives, Chris Tegg. That's going to be an interesting and I'm sure entertaining hour of conversation. Remember, at the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce, we really are stronger together. See you all next month. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, folks. Take care.